Welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Presented to you by Netspend. Homegrown in Austin, Netspend has been a leading provider of consumer and business payment solutions for almost 25 years. From prepaid cards to mobile bank accounts to money movement services, Netspend connects people, brands, and payment products to deliver innovative financial solutions.
Hello there, and welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the podcast about the future of Austin's technology community. My name is Thom Singer, and I have been with the Austin Technology Council now for about coming up on 18 months. And I will tell you, it has been a very interesting journey. I've had the opportunity now to talk to well over 200 people directly in our tech community and side conversations with many, many more as we look to where Austin has come from, where we are today, and where we're going in the future. Each week on this podcast, I try to engage with local leaders so that we can hear their story, find out what they're doing now, and see their vision for the future. And this week, I'm excited because we have on the show my friend, Dr. John Oberg. Now, he is the founder of Precina Health. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Southern California, and he's a board member on several companies. But at his core, John is a serial entrepreneur who now is trying to find good fixes in healthcare from the inside out. Hey, John Oberg, welcome to Austin Tech Connect.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk to you.
So, John, I've known you for a long time. You've been in and around the Austin community, the tech community for a long time. Let everybody know kind of how you got to Austin, how you got started in entrepreneurship, and then we'll lead up to where you are now.
Yeah, I started a company back in the early 2000s. I think it was 2005 or so that we moved here. We needed to hire more software developers, and we looked at moving the company that we were working with either to Silicon Valley or to Austin, Texas. And people who moved to Austin understand all the wonderful draws there are in Austin, Texas. And it was a pretty easy choice.
Yeah. And in 2005, that was sort of right as Austin began. It's the hockey stick, right? I got here in 91. Yeah. We started the turnaround from the 1980s where Texas was sort of in the savings and loan and the oil crash and all that. 91 is sort of where we turned the corner. But around 2005 is when things started to get really exciting and moving really fast. So what are some of the changes that you've seen from 2005 Austin to today's Austin?
I mean, the most impressive physical change has been just the skyline downtown. It's almost unrecognizable. I visited and lived in Austin for a couple of months for the first time in the mid 90s. And it's just, it's really awe-inspiring to see how many people have decided to make this home. And it's really neat to see how many different people are working as a community to build a really vibrant economy that's now being talked about at the, national and international levels. It's really great.
So let's talk about that first company that you came here with. What was that about, and what did you do after that?
It was a company called Mobile Evolution. We set up all of the technology and wrote the patents to do credit card processing on mobile phones before smartphones were around. So we were doing credit card processing by text message.
But that was a different game around that time.
Man, we were too early. So that was and I did a great job of destroying the company and, taking it straight into the ground and learning all the lessons that go along with that. So,
yeah, but that's the story of a lot of great entrepreneurs is when I get the chance to peel back that onion, their first, maybe their second, sometimes their third company, they didn't do it right, but that's how we learn. Right. And that's the thing that's great about entrepreneurship is if you make a mistake, you're not out of the game. Nobody says, well, that company failed, so we hate him and he never gets another chance. In fact, most investors that I talk to kind of like to have people who have a little bit of scar tissue around them because they know they won't make the same mistake twice.
Yeah, I think as long as you learn from your mistakes, I've come full circle and I invest in other companies now and I'm continuing to work on, companies that I've started or built. And I think as long as you're willing to learn, right? That's the key.
Nice.
A key.
So let's fast forward to today. So what is Precina Health? Let's talk a little bit about how you got into what you're doing now.
Yeah, so Precina Health, the roots of it started back when I started Sedera Health with Dr. Tony Dale back in 2014-15. And we started a medical cost sharing organization. And that's a whole nother topic that we could talk about. But essentially, we were looking to be a substitute for health insurance. And as a payer, somebody who's, involved with people's medical needs, we had the same challenges that health insurance has, which is that people who have chronic disease, especially lots of them, are having a really hard time. in the healthcare industry. And so I went back to USC, I got my doctorate, and I really wanted to study what happens with especially diabetes, hypertension, pulmonary disease. And I teamed up with Dr. Dustin Williams, who's a medical doctor who founded OnlineMedEd. And we did a pilot study with 50 patients along the way that had diabetes. And, doctors would tell you that if you can control diabetes 50% of the time in 14 months, you're doing a great job. And, academics would tell you if you have diabetes and hypertension, controlling both of them only happens 10% of the time. Well, we got diabetes into control for 49 out of 50 patients in 12 weeks with people that were in low income and rural situations. So just jaw-dropping pilot study. We started a medical practice, and we're having similar success in our medical practice. And we're really focused on, not only the people that have commercial insurance, but if someone's got Medicaid and they're in a tough situation, we have a medical practice that reimagines their entire experience, built for helping them.
So I love to hear some of these stories, because Austin is finally, it's been talked about for decades, but it's finally starting to become a med tech and a biotech town. We're starting to see, some traction on this. You may remember back around the early 2000s, everybody thought that, biotech was the next thing in Austin, and the med tech was coming in. It's taken us nearly 20 years, but it's starting to happen. I really think that we're starting to see a coming together of this type of thing. So I love to see when technology and medicine come together and really be able to help the people. So what are some of the things that you're thinking as you're starting this? Where does it go? Where does Precina Health go next?
Well, for us in particular, we think we found a place that could set up new protocols for a subspecialty of medicine that may fill a gap that exists globally. There's 3.5 billion people that are impacted by chronic disease. And we think there's just like infectious disease is a subspecialty of medicine different than what we're doing. We think we found a place where there's a new set of protocols that can really help both the provider and the patient, and then save a ton of money for the payer. And so we think we have a really great solution there based on relationships. I think that's the thing that would be most interesting and probably the most relevant to like what's happening with Austin and Austin's technology scene and the Austin Technology Council. The relationships around the technology in Austin. Like I think about some of the real power players that are behind the scenes trying to make Austin great and are making Austin great. Sarah Lamas is one of the people that's been really influential for me. I think about.
I don't know Sarah. Tell us who she is.
Sarah's an attorney in town who works as both an attorney and she works also as a consultant, and does just an amazing job of helping the community with groups like the Austin Healthcare Council. And so she's just, I think quietly and without self-promotion, really helping a lot of people develop their, med tech, healthcare, medical practices, whatever the case may be. Super smart around all the regulation that you have to do correctly, but just been a great sounding board and a mentor for me.
Nice. Well, keep going.
Yeah. I think, another really close friend of mine, Emma Cartmel, is a VC who's really focused on health tech in town and helping a lot of different organizations get exposure, not just in Austin, but nationally. And so she's just, consistently awing me at the things that she's working on to help the big picture of helping healthcare, and not just on the economic front, like really, truly doing things to help patients. And that's where my heart is helping the patients, especially the patients that have a hard time with the healthcare system, because it can be brutal.
So it's interesting. You sort of touch on something that's special to my heart, and that is sort of this relationship web in Austin. Yeah. And I mean, we can go back 30 years, and I talk about it a lot. I do a speech for organizations that want to hear about the history of Austin tech. And most of our young entrepreneurs think that this whole tech ecosystem really started to evolve only in the last, 7 to 10 years, when in reality, we can take this back to, all the way back to the 1980s probably. And obviously the impetus was Dr. George Kosmeski. I talk about him a lot. He was the one who founded the Austin Technology Council as the Austin Software Council at the time. But this web of connectivity and of people helping each other, like, you mentioned Emma and Sarah, there's so many others, people who are always behind the scenes and really being part of that relationship web. What are your thoughts on this? And where do you think we were? What have you seen over the past 20 years?
I mean, so this is an area of really intense personal interest, but it's also a place of real professional interest. So my doctorate is in social work, not in medicine. And I'm not a clinical social worker. I'm a macro social worker. So I look at the systems that impact all of the outcomes inside of a particular, system, all of the systems that impact healthcare in particular. And so I've studied relationships, and I break them down for my team. We talk about patient relationships, but it's really true for all professional relationships that there's this skill set that we need to build. And it shows up in the ability to have, deep conversations and able to have hard conversations. And so the things that we talk about, and that I talk about when I'm teaching, are about the 4 skill sets of relationship, right? So we talk about there's the ability to accept somebody where they are, especially if they have a different point of view. And that just seems to be harder and harder these days in the broader society.
God, that could be a whole other podcast, just talking about being able to accept people where they are and understand maybe people have a different background or different decisions. But that would be a whole other half-hour podcast or 3-hour podcast.
I mean, we talk about just, understanding may get in the way of acceptance sometimes. So sometimes I just accept that I can't understand, but just different. It's that, I'm happy to come back and talk about that. Then we talk about trustworthiness, like being able to hold someone's confidence, if they tell you something in confidence. And then there's vulnerability, being willing to share and tell people where you really are, and being self-aware enough to know where you really are. And then the one that is, the simplest and maybe the hardest is the willingness to see somebody in their best light. Just give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm so glad, taking this right back to when I moved to Austin in 2005, I met the leader of the Austin Technology Council, Alicia Lagarde, who was Alicia Ring at the time. And again, just another person who was so gracious to introduce me to so many people. And, when I met you, you were a great connector, and everyone was so willing to help out and get me connected and to help me forward in the thing that I was working on, whether they believed in that thing or not. And it was really just amazing. And so I've really tried, when people move into Austin, to try to help them get connected in that same way and give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Just see them in their best light every time.
So I really love these 4 points, and it probably comes out of stuff that you studied, but I do like these 4 points of being able to accept people where they are, to have that trustworthiness. The vulnerability, I think, is more important today in 2023 than it probably ever has been. And then the one now that is ringing in my ears since you said it is this ability to see people in their best light. Why do you think maybe we've gotten away from that? Not just Austin, but in society, where now we sort of look for, the dark and dirty side in people.
I think there's and now I'm going outside of my research. Now I'm going to speak from my just kind of experiences rather than the academic part of what I do. I think that people innately want to feel good. And one of the ways we can feel good as a society is to compare ourselves to somebody else's situation so that we can feel a little bit more okay. I think it's the same reason that soap operas have been on for 45 years on television, because, they show a story that's so messed up. Right?
Longer than that. I saw the other day that Days of Our Lives debuted the year before I was born, and it's still on the air, and I'm 57. So it's almost 60 years, I think, or 60 years for soap operas.
I thought you were 45, Tom.
No, that's my vulnerability. I'm not scared to tell people how old I am.
That's great. That's wonderful. And so I think that people want to feel good, and we're not doing a good enough job of helping each other feel good about things. And so we have to get that need met ourselves. I just think that we need to do a better job of, look, the new Surgeon General who's back in the role again,
Dr.
often
Vivek Murthy. Yes.
Yeah. And Murthy has often said that, the largest problem we're facing as a society is isolation. And there's a lot of science behind that. I heard one time, I don't know where the study came from, but that in the 50s and 60s, men in particular had 12 other men they could talk to about anything very deeply. And that number had shrunk to less than 3 in the early 2000s. Like, that is frightening. We're a communal animal.
A study came out recently that I was reading that said that 15% of men in America and 10% of women claim they have no close friends. So that is a frightening number, which actually comes back to the whole thing of our tech ecosystem, is how can our tech companies help solve some of these problems? Because we definitely have a community within inside a company. So why do people feel so isolated?
Yeah, I think, technology is not the answer to the problem. It is a catalyst to help solve the problem. And it's definitely a piece of it. And I think that I'm enamored with technology. I love it. We love to think about how to use AI inside of our medical practice in ways that are ethically appropriate, clinically appropriate, but using it in every place we possibly can. But I also recognize, someone came out yesterday on one of the social media sites and said within 5 years you're going to have a 150-pound robot who can, talk to you and listen to you, and I think there is some danger there when people lean on the wrong thing, right? Because it's the easy thing to do versus the right thing to do. And so I think, if I had to encourage people, be really to lean into relationships, that would be my encouragement, is to lean in, learn these skills, and really, dive into the good stuff.
So part of what, you're about, and part of what you do both in this practice that you're involved with, but also in all the work that you do, is helping to reverse some of the trends that negatively impact people. So as we look at Austin and beyond, what should all of us be doing to try and impact these negative trends?
I mean, for me, the thing that I talk about with people a lot is, what can you control? You can control your thoughts and you can control your actions. And so if there's people that aren't feeling great, we talk about, is the emotion driving the action, or is the action driving the emotion? And it takes a minute if you've got a reverse course on that one. So, and I don't use those words specifically when I talk to people, but that's at the core of what I'm getting at, is like, how do you take control of the things you can take control of? And then what outcomes do you want to have? And how do you make a plan to drive toward that? And it's, whether I apply that obviously with chronic disease, but it's really similar across lots of different things. I talk to professional athletes about the same things. I talk to business owners outside of healthcare, outside of technology, about the same things. People are people.
So, this is the Austin Technology Council's podcast. So let's take the focus sort of onto all of these, organizations, all of these tech leaders that we have here. What's something they should be doing more of to be able to have a positive impact on their employees, on their customers, and on Austin, and dare I say, on the world? What should our leaders be doing?
The thing that I would love to see, and maybe this is happening, I just am not in the middle of it like I was, 10, 15 years ago, but 10 or 15 years ago, particularly at the Austin Technology Council and some other organizations around town, there was this real camaraderie, this real sense of people all doing it together, and people were, deeply connected. And that was the tech companies, there were service providers, there were, it really felt like the whole city. And it just feels a little less connected than it did 15 years ago. And maybe that's just my perspective, but I'm interested to hear your perspective, Tommy. Is that a thing that's happening from other people's perspectives?
It is a thing that's happening from other people's perspectives. And from my perspective, having been very involved in this community now for, over 30 years, I definitely see it. And it pains me sometimes, especially since I've taken this role with ATC, is there's not a tech community anymore. There's like 15 tech communities, and that's great. And that happens because we have diversity, and the diversity helps our economy to be able to have all these different types, having fintech and medtech and semiconductor and software and gaming and all these different things. That's actually a very healthy thing for Austin. But what's happened is there's all these different focuses on just hanging out with people who are like me. So you tend to see all the fintech people only want to talk to the fintech people, and the medtech people only want to hang with the medtech people. And then you also see it sort of sliced, vertically and horizontally, where the CEOs of funded companies only want to go to dinner with other funded CEOs of companies. And I was talking to one gentleman, and he said, I don't need to support something like the Austin Technology Council because my VC takes us out, twice a year with the whole portfolio. So that's where I get my community networking. And I said, well, that's kind of an ivory tower. And he said, yeah, but that's where I want to spend my time. And he didn't use these words, but he goes, I don't want to be bothered by the riffraff. And that wasn't his exact words, but that was how I interpreted it. And we didn't have a conflict because I said, well, but that's where the serendipity of building community comes from. And so I do find there's people who want to live in a box that's this big and blue, and they don't want to mingle with everybody else. And so that personally is something that bothers me. However, what has made Austin great is that web that has gone out everywhere. Yeah. Now, I spend a lot of time with talking to the leaders of other technology councils around North America. There's 100 technology councils in North America, and 66 of them belong to an organization called TECNA, which is the Technology Councils of North America Association. And in talking to these cities, who are really having this sense of community where everybody shows up and everybody supports, I've asked them, how, why, how is that happening? And they've been very clear that when you're trying to build something, everybody comes together because everybody wants to be part of it. And there's that vibe you talked about in 2005 when you got here. And they said, when you reach the point that you are there, people don't necessarily need to show up with their time, their money, their resources, because they feel like, oh, we're already Austin. And I've heard that from about 6 different communities who are actively trying to recreate what we've created, that hockey stick of Boomtown.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of both sides of the take on that from me.
I remember, was it Pike Powers and Pete Winstead and Brian Fensky were the guys that really had made it as the 3 big tech lawyers when I was early Austin.
Carmelo Gordian and Matt Lyons. I mean, there were probably about
Matt
10
Lyons
of them.
still practicing. Matt's still an attorney with one of the companies that I work with, and then there was I'm trying to think of some other names.
And I have to full disclosure, I worked for Matt as the marketing director at Brobeck, Flager and Harrison and at Andrews Kurth for 5.5 years. And I kind of have to credit Matt for sort of making my career, because he gave me a real big boost back around the 2000s.
Well, there's Paul Herdlow, and I mean, there's a whole bunch. I just think of all the lawyers who were kind of on top of the world back then that pitched in early days for the community when they didn't have to. And I don't mean it. Certainly, I know that one of those guys helped me out when he was working on $1 billion deals. And I asked him one day, I was like, "Why? Like, you haven't sent me a bill in 3 months?" He's like, "You can't afford me. I just need to help." and so it was that kind of attitude. And so I wish I knew more about farming. I grew up in Los Angeles, so I don't know a thing about farming, but I've heard that every once in a while you have to rotate the crops and take care of the fields. And you've got to, it's not just about what you get out of the fields, it's about what you put into the fields. And so maybe it's incumbent on people like me to step back in and say, hey, now it's full circle. What can I do to help mentor that group and be a part of that web where I'm strengthening the web? And so maybe I'm part of the problem, Tom.
Well, and that's what we're trying to do as we reinvent the Austin Technology Council, is we're trying to pull in those people who can show up and be visible. And, one of the people who's great at it in our community is Mark McLean. He's the former chairman, before I was here, of the Austin Technology Council. But several times, as I've been going through this metamorphosis with ATC, I've reached out to Mark, and every single time he has found a way to either directly help me or send me to somebody who can if he has a conflict. And I read a thing about Dr. George Kosmetsky recently in his biography that said that as busy as he was and as involved as he was in national and international economic things that were going on in the 70s and the 80s, as well as super involved in the Austin business community, they said that if you needed him, he was there. And for some reason, that has just sat with me that, those are the people, Mark McLean and many others, that if you need them, they are there. That's what we need to be highlighting in our community.
I don't know Mark well, but I do know Mark. And I would say that's exactly the experience I've had with him. And anybody that I know that's ever talked about Mark has said that exact same thing. And, as I think about giving back into the community, I hope that someday some people will say that about me too. I don't know that I've acted well enough to do that yet, but I think that's a great, it's a great call to action for people who've benefited from the community as I have. And I certainly know that ATC and the tech community tried to help me for no good reason.
So you bring that up, you say, hey, maybe I haven't done that well enough, but now I need to start doing that. How can the entrepreneurs and the other leaders in our tech ecosystem who have benefited from where we've come from, how can they give back? How can they do this in a way, that is being there to serve? What advice do you have for yourself and others?
I think, my reflection that I'm going to take away from today is how am I going to handle my time, my talent, and my treasure? Like, those are the things that I have to give. And so I would turn it back to you, Tom, and say, if you're the guy right now trying to solve the problem, if I could say, here's time, here's talent, here's treasure, what are the things that I can do to be most helpful? They would be high impact areas of those, utilization of those resources. What would be the ask? Like, and whether it's with me or someone like me, what are the most important things we can be thinking about to give?
I love it when a guest turns it around and interviews me. I'm like, whoa, I wasn't expecting to have questions thrown at me. From the time standpoint, I think what our tech community needs and what the Austin Technology Council needs is for some of these real leaders to show up. You don't have to come to everything. You don't have to come to, the networking breakfasts and things like that, but things like the CEO Summit. It's a 5-hour commitment, 6-hour commitment if you stay for happy hour. having people show up for that and just be willing to be seen, because when those leaders are seen, then the cue from that next generation is given and they know that, oh, that means I have to come. And I think that's something that was very prevalent in the 90s and 2000s was all the leaders showed up. So those future leaders decided, well, I need to be there. So I think showing up at things, and it's not just ATC, there's a whole bunch of organizations, that are trying to support our tech ecosystem. And I think having some of those, I don't know how we describe it, successful or iconic, whatever, people actually show up once in a while and be present at a variety of organizations and a variety of things is good. On the treasure side, these groups don't run by magic. We have to have members and sponsors to be able to pull it together. And, when we have that, if that money is done in a fiduciary way, that it's done correctly, that money can be multiplied many times. Now, there's examples of, things where money hasn't been handled right by different organizations and things like that. And that burns some people who gave sponsorship money and things like that. But if we can do that and actually have it done right, then the community totally benefits. And then, treasure, again, I just think that so many of our people have knowledge that is so deep, and being willing to do what the Pike Powers and the Brian Finskys and the Matt Lyons and Carmelo and, all of those people, we're talking about lawyers and that side, but across the board examples of people who said, you can't afford me, but I'm going to help you anyway. I think that's beautiful.
Well, it's funny. I just, you're saying that, I think I still am actively seeking for mentors as I go through the process. And so, Mohan Karbindra is one of the guys that mentors me, and a former Apple guy, and a number of other companies he's been incredibly successful with. And he's been very, very generous with his time with me. And I think through what, mentoring looks like as we go through this, rebuilding of the community. And it does and this is going to show my lack of kind of being plugged in like I used to be, is the community working together so that there's not an event every week where it's, almost impossible for someone to show up at all of them?
Well, we're trying, right? There's an effort amongst many of the nonprofit organizations to create a calendar where we can do it. When we know someone has a big event, don't schedule your big event without asking, hey, when is yours? Have you picked a date yet? And having more dialogue with our CEO/C-suite summit. I have 5 different organizations that said, hey, we'll be your community partner. We'll help promote your event because we know it's the most important event of the year to ATC. Now, I put it out there to many organizations saying, who wants to be a community partner? And here's what I need to do it. There was no money involved, but it was promotion. It was helping get people there. And Austin Women in Technology was the first to say, we're a partner. We're not a competitor. The Austin Venture Association, David over there, has been really good at trying to say, hey, all these groups need to work together. The Chamber, the Austin Association for Corporate Growth. Now, full disclosure, my wife is the administrator for that organization, but they definitely said, hey, we want to help, because I helped them with their big award show. We put it in our newsletter when it was time for people to apply for the Growth Awards. We supported that. So in return, the other way. And then Tech Ranch, and also Opportunity Austin, who stepped up to be one of the presenting sponsors, because they think all of these groups need to be working together and doing things. So I think there is a movement for the ones that are, can set their own personal agenda aside to work for the greater good.
It's amazing how I oftentimes didn't know, like, there was no clear path to what I was going to get out of a meeting or a group or a relationship, and yet it's always, paid dividends. And I don't think it should be about that. It shouldn't be about what am I going to get out of it. It's what can I give into it. For me, at least, that was the mindset I had to take into it to be most successful. Is really about giving, not getting. And that shift has really helped me. I think I've benefited far more than I've given in, but that wasn't my focus at the time. And so I think for me, at least in the pandemic, I shifted back to being a little bit more myopic about, hand to mouth, just getting one foot in front of the other.
I think all of us had to do that.
Yeah. And so I think I think this conversation is really now a chance for me to step back and say, okay, how do I re-engage in that thing that was not just important to me, but also enjoyable and fun? So I like the relationships.
And what I try to teach people is, when you show up, and I hate to use the word networking because everybody has a preconceived notion, some negative on that word, but it's the word. When you show up to network and just win-win situations. The serendipity of what can happen is huge. The people you meet, people meet their co-founders, people find their next key employee, people find, mentors and customers, et cetera. But it's not going to happen every time. And
Right.
so if you show up and just say, hey, this is a win-win for me and the people I meet, maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 15 times, you find gold. But if you don't go to those 10 times or 15 times, you never get the gold.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a great reminder. Thanks for not chastising me and bringing me back around.
So, John, as we wrap this up, let's look to the future. What do you think is the future for our overall tech and business ecosystem for Austin? What do you think happens next?
Such a great question. And I don't claim to be any type of expert about, the future. I can tell you what I hope happens next. And what I hope happens next is that we take all the things we've learned from our past around community and we re-engage those at scale now, because we are, I think there's been a lot of talk about being the third coast and about being, the Silicon Hills and all the different pillars that we want to build here. And there's so many good things happening, big companies, medium-sized companies, small companies. There's so much good happening. I hope that as we move forward, we try to do it cohesively. So I think that's the thing that I would hope for. There's been so many great relationships I've been able to build, throughout the years. My two closest friends I met here as a result of the tech community, and we don't talk business hardly at all. We've traveled the world together. Our families have grown up together. And so if you talk about the greatest treasure that's come out of, Austin's technology, for me, it's been, the group that I would call my family in Austin here at home. And they've grown up with my family and I've grown up with their families. And so I think the future, I hope what the future holds is, great economic prosperity, but I hope that's secondary to the relationships that we form. I hope it's secondary to the people's lives well lived here. We have such a great town with, the Greenbelt and the parks so that's my hope. My hope is that all the great things that we do are surpassed by everything else that Austin has to offer.
Well, the term I throw around is, as we're all working to do the things that we all do, whether it's build a business, build a nonprofit, raise children, all the different things that everybody tries to do in all aspects of their life. The term I use is we need to remember one Austin. We need to be doing it all for a goal, and we can take a lot of different paths to be there, but we can't be competitive. We have to be collaborative, which leads me to the question I ask everybody who comes on the show. My personal belief is community, collaboration, and conversations can solve all problems. When I say those three words, which one resonates the most with you and why?
Conversations for me. And the reason is probably because in my strengths finder, my number one is individualization. Like I really believe in that one-on-one. So I love community. I love collaboration, hugely, hugely important to me. But conversations, I think if I could, wave a magic wand, it would be to have everyone be a better listener to each other. And I would start with myself. So I really work at doing that better myself, because I think the number of times I hear people solving problems and people jump to the solution without really listening to what the problem is for the other person, or really understanding the root cause of that problem. And I'm not talking about just business problems. I'm talking about, people just not being heard. I think if we could really listen in the conversation more effectively, there'd be a lot more solving the right thing instead of solving something.
So, John, if somebody comes to visit Austin, maybe somebody from University of Southern California, maybe it's an old high school friend, they've never been to Austin before, where's the one place you take them?
I mean, we love to walk Lady Bird Lake, and you'll find me often on that walk, stopping by either P. Terry's or Terry Black's.
There you go. That all sounds good. Well, Dr. John Oberg, thank you so much for being a guest here on Austin Tech Connect. Any final words?
Thanks, Tom. I think this has been really, a great chance for me to, stroll down memory lane about Austin Tech Council and share a little bit about how it's helped me. I just wish we had more time to talk about, all of the impacts ATC has had for me personally and professionally. And, it's a great encouragement for me to really get involved. And I expect you to hold me to that.
Oh, trust me. Anybody who says, I want to support you and ATC, I hit them up. So,
I'm in.
Awesome. So, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened to this show. You know what? Is your company a member of the Austin Technology Council? We need your, what was it? Your time, your treasure,
Talent.
and talent. We need that to be part of our community, and we want you involved, and we want to hear your voice as we at the Austin Technology Council look to the future. So make sure that you've joined the Austin Technology Council today.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Tech Connect podcast. Make sure your company is a member of the Austin Technology Council and add your voice to the future of our tech ecosystem in Central Texas.